what's up you guys, how you doing? My name is Kylie if this is your first time here, and today, as you saw by the title, yes, we will be talking about Scream 2 today. Before I start though, there are a couple different content creators that I want to talk about. The first one is Royal Horror. I recently connected with him and he is super cool. He has a great channel, so definitely check him out. And my friend Maya just started her channel. She did a collection video, so if you're interested in that, definitely check her out. Give her some love, some encouragement, because starting a YouTube channel is not easy. I also want to mention my Patreon, because if you join my first tier, you get early access to all of my content. If you join the second tier, then you get all my extra bonus content. Okay, I'm sorry, now we can get on with the video. So Scream. This came out in 1997, received an 81% on Rotten Tomatoes, and here's the synopsis. 2 years after the first series of murders, as Sydney acclimates to college life, someone donning the ghost face costume begins a new string of killings. If you're new here, I always get into some fun facts first, and then I do my spoiler-free thoughts on the movie, and then I'll get into a spoiler-filled breakdown for everybody that has seen it. Kevin Williamson had the idea for this sequel while he was still writing the first Scream movie. This movie began principal photography just 6 months after the release of the first Scream movie, and it was released less than a year after the first Scream movie came out. The cast was also not informed of who the killer was until their scene was shot. So that being said, the cast also didn't receive the last 10 pages of the script until they were shooting them. Actors who auditioned for the part of Derek had to sing I Think I Love You in a cappella. In Scream, Tatum asks Sydney, if they made a movie about this, who would you want to play you? And Sydney answers, with my luck they would cast Tori Spelling, and in Stab, the movie within this movie, they did cast Tori Spelling. A couple different titles were in consideration for this sequel, including Scream Again, Scream Louder, and Scream the Sequel, which I think Scream Louder would have been kind of funny. That is a pretty corny title though. I think I'm glad that they just went with Scream 2, but they had some options here. Most of the outdoor scenes were filmed at Agnes Scott College, which is a women's college in Georgia. This movie was scheduled to be released alongside Tomorrow Never Dies and Titanic, but both movies changed their release date because they didn't want to compete with Scream 2. Denise Richards was offered a role in this film, but she turned it down because she was working on Starship Troopers. Speaking of, Denise Richards was in a movie called Valentine, and I will be reviewing that on Friday. Apparently, Tobey Maguire was offered the role of Mickey. That would have been really weird. You know what? I've changed my mind. I think he actually would have brought a really good weird energy to this movie. When Cece, who is played by Sarah Michelle Gellar, is talking on the phone to one of her friends, the friend on the phone is Selma Blair. There is a frat party scene in this movie, and Matthew Lillard is one of the extras in that scene. Kevin Williamson, the screenwriter, also has a cameo in this movie, and he is the one who interviewed Cotton on TV. And finally, Wes Craven's cameo was in the hospital scene. He was just a man in the hospital. Okay, so getting into my spoiler-free thoughts on the movie. So first up, I just want to mention that I really like the location of this movie. I love that we switch up the location. I think it's much better than if we had just stayed in Woodsboro. I think that that's kind of a fault of a lot of slasher franchises, especially because they get bogged down just staying in the same place. Because when you stay in the same location, I just feel like a lot of those franchises rely on a lot of the aspects that the original movie had because they're just in the same location, like Friday the 13th comes to mind. So I think that this was absolutely a fresh enough setting with fresh enough characters to make it a much more unique story to the first movie. But it still gave us similar moments and our same favorite characters from the first Scream movie, and so the vibes were consistent. Which, as I mentioned during my review of Scream, that's obviously one of my favorite horror movies of all time. I love this sequel as well, but the only thing that doesn't work for me about these movies is Dewey. The channel that I mentioned earlier, Royal Horror, he mentioned this in his review of Scream as well, that he doesn't like the character of Dewey either. That's something that I actually forgot to mention in my review of Scream. I don't think he works in a single Scream movie. I don't like him in any of the movies. I think he's supposed to be kind of a lovable idiot, but to me, he's just an idiot, and I don't think he's really funny. And maybe he is there just to be funny, just for us to laugh at him, but I'm not sure because they try to force this chemistry with him and Gail. And it's funny that I have to say force because that couple is married in real life, or they were married in real life for a very long time. So I don't think that he's just there for us to make fun of him, and even if that was the case, that doesn't work for me. And honestly, the only character that I dislike more than him is his mustache. Another thing is, he's supposed to be the love interest of Gail, but he has this really weird intimate chemistry with Sydney. That's partially fair because of everything that they went to together. She lost her best friend, it was his little sister, but it still reads as really weird to me because in every scene that they have together when they reconnect and everything, I'm like, okay, are you guys gonna kiss? Are you guys about to make out? And those two being together was never on the table. In the first movie, she was in high school and he is her dead best friend's cop older brother. Weird dynamic. So that might be one of my unpopular opinions about this movie or this franchise. I don't know, let me know down below. But I think that him as a character and his relationship with Gail is really one of the only parts of this movie that I don't like. Because other than him, I love every character that they brought back. back. You know, Gale, Randy, obviously Sydney. And I love the surrounding cast as well. They brought Sarah Michelle Gellar in, iconic. At the time of this movie, she was also filming Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and she would also go on to star in Scooby-Doo. But something about this franchise involving so many Scooby-Doo stars just, it sits right with my soul. And yet again, of course, we have more meta commentary in this movie. Randy tells us about the rules of sequels. So the movie follows a traditional structure, but it still breaks out of a lot of tropes. One trope that this movie does not break out of is involved with the opening scene, but we'll talk about that during spoilers. And this time with the commentary about sequels, the cup runneth over, okay? There are a lot of tropes that go into sequels, and they explore a ton of it in this movie. And I love this commentary so much because when you think about horror tropes, your mind doesn't typically go to sequels and what inherently makes a sequel. Typically we think about, okay, in slashers, the guy wears a mask, he can't die, there's a final girl, etc. This is why the commentary of this movie in particular is so unique, because I don't think that the tropes of sequels have really been explored all too much with commentary. And with this, I love it because yet again, I really did not expect the ending. They still maintained so many surprises. Like, I really didn't think that there would be another amazing twisty ending that would rock me, but here we are. But I love this sequel. I think that it absolutely solidified the cast that became the true backbone of this franchise. And that in turn is what separates this franchise from so many other slashers. Because it's not the killers and it's not the mask that becomes so iconic, it's the survivors. And I've always thought that was really cool. You'll also notice with most franchises that sequels typically are not as strong as the original movie. I think there are exceptions to this, like Friday the 13th, I would say Child's Play obviously, maybe Final Destination. I really love Final Destination 3. Comment down below which franchises you think have better sequels than the original movie. But for the most part, you know, most of the time the first movie is the best one. Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, Jaws, etc. But to wrap up my spoiler section, I think that this is one of my favorite sequels of all time. I think particularly because of the ending and because it was so shocking to me. This was also only my second time watching this sequel. The first time I saw it was several years ago. And the ending, while a little bit convoluted, it definitely contains layers, okay? There are a lot of twists that are involved with the ending. Okay, I'm very sorry, but this dummy right here did not think that the leaf blower would be picked up so well by my mic, so sorry that it is literally so loud in this video. I should have stopped recording, but alas. And it's so much fun because for a little bit I was like, this feels a tad predictable. I think I know who the killer is. I promise you, even if you are able to predict it, they still will throw some major curveballs at you, and that is all I will say. But if you haven't already, absolutely watch this sequel and then come back to my review, because right now I'm going to be getting into my fun facts that contain spoilers. And then of course my spoiler-filled breakdown of the movie. To kick it off with spoiler-filled fun facts, according to Wes Craven, it was Dwayne Martin's idea to leave after Randy was killed to make the movie more realistic. If you don't remember, Dwayne was Gale's cameraman in this movie. During the scene where Gale is defending Dewey to Debbie, she says Dewey's one of the good guys unlike some of us, and this was a slight allusion to the fact that Debbie was not one of the good guys. Apparently one of the extras of this movie leaked the film script on the internet, which was one of the first big movie leaks in history. As a result, the script was almost entirely rewritten, and I will get into all those changes in just a moment. Because of the rewrites, sometimes pages of the script would not be completed until the day that they were being shot. Security was tightened, everyone had to sign non-disclosure agreements, and they also had to do a lot of reshoots. And the script was printed on a very special type of paper that couldn't be copied, and often it was destroyed after they finished filming. So we have a ton of changes here. Dewey had originally transferred himself from Woodsboro Police to the security staff on campus so he could be closer to Sydney to keep her safe. Randy was originally Gale's new cameraman, and Joel was a med student and friends with Sydney. Derek was also the film student shooting the documentary, not Mickey. Debbie Salt was also originally written to be a lot more aggressive, and she actually had a line of dialogue where she asked Sydney if she finally snapped and if she's the one doing the killings. And then she was punched in the face by Gale as a result, and the scene where Sydney slaps Gale never happened. I think I would have preferred that. I think they should have left that in. The killers were also originally Derek, Hallie, and Debbie Salt, or Mrs. Loomis. A nod to Halloween, by the way, that I didn't mention in my review of Scream, but Billy Loomis, Dr. Loomis, you know, Halloween, etc., you know. You get it. In the end, Loomis ends up shooting Derek and Hallie, but then gets stabbed by Cotton before she can shoot Sydney and Gale. And then Cotton was supposed to have a change of heart and decide to get even on both Sydney and Gale, because he considered them responsible for ruining his life, and so then he stabs and kills Gale, and then he runs after Sydney. And then Kevin Williamson had actually stopped writing there, so there wasn't any more to that script, but he left some notes on the script, and so the general gist of the ending was that Cotton and Sydney would eventually stab each other and die lying side by side. And so at that point, Williamson had probably intended to end this franchise with this movie. Little did they know that there was quite a bit more to explore. So now getting on to my spoiler-filled breakdown. With this one, I think I am going to break down the plot just a little bit more because I definitely want to talk about the opening of this movie. I'm not really a huge fan of the fact that the Scream franchise decided to do this with every installment. You know, where the opening doesn't really have much to do with the rest of the movie, it just kind of sets the tone, it's the first kill or two. And this movie might have my least favorite opening. I think I'm just honestly not a fan of when horror movies do this in general. I prefer when the story starts where it actually starts, you know? The first Scream is obviously an exception because in that first scene we have Drew Barrymore, we have one of the best openings in horror history, that huge twist. With this movie, the opening was connected, it provided accurate commentary, but I don't like that the characters' dialogue was somewhat inconsistent with the following actions in the movie. They were literally talking about how slashers fail to provide the black perspective, and I think that they mentioned that the black guy always dies first. I can't remember though, but then that's exactly what happens in the movie. The black guy dies first. Like, I don't know, why would you make the commentary and then follow through with it and then just follow the trope? Because my favorite thing about Scream is that it makes commentary on the tropes and then it breaks free of them. So that was just, I don't know, it was just a little bit weird to me. And then none of the main cast, none of the core cast was black. So I don't know, were they calling themselves out? Were they making fun of themselves? Did they just really fail to see the irony of that? Those characters were pretty annoying though. I wasn't a fan of that couple in the opening scene. I mean, why was she just yelling at the screen in a crowded movie theater? Majority of the opening of this movie I find pretty weak, but I do actually love Stab, the movie within the movie. I love how they reimagined Drew Barrymore's death scene in that, but the whole commenting on a trope and then following through with the trope was just kind of weird to me. Although I will say with the commentary, there is one thing that they followed through on that I did appreciate. I will give it to them that I do like that the cameraman left the situation when it became really dangerous, because that is not typical of a horror movie at all. You will rarely, very rarely see a character that is so smart that they will remove themselves entirely from a situation and then come back in the end and be like, what's up? I'm alive. But I'm guessing, this is just my speculation, maybe one of you guys actually knows the correct answer to this, but I'm guessing that because of this rewrite, Randy ended up dying instead. Because I would assume that maybe Joel was supposed to die in the van as the cameraman, but then they got rid of Randy instead, and that did make me sad. I was bummed to lose Randy. And they do make commentary about it in Scream 3, which I'll talk about that in the next video. But yeah, that was such a bummer moment. I really like Randy. I really wish that he was more of a core part of the cast, but they did have to up the stakes of this movie. It is a sequel, and that's kind of one of the rules, I think, that, you know, any of the main characters could also die. So it was fair. It was a fair choice. I just wish that he was one of the core characters instead of Dewey. Because I just, like I mentioned, I don't like Dewey. Me and all my friends hate Dewey. You know what I think would have been cool is if he had if the character of Randy had removed himself from that group of people and not been involved with their lives anymore, because then he wouldn't get sucked into the sequel and the trilogy and all the murders and stuff. But he could be that sage, wise old friend that now lives up a mountain, and they could just give him a call and be like, hey, it's happening again. What are the rules of a trilogy? And in the next movie, he does, okay. If you're watching these movies for the first time and following my reviews and whatnot, I'm not going to spoil it, so let's just not talk about that. Another thing about this movie that was a little bit off for me was the character of Derek. They tried to hint to us a couple of times that Derek might be the killer, and I get that that's where Sydney's headspace would probably be because, you know, that happened to her before, but as the audience, as us watching it, it would be just a little bit too obvious that the boyfriend would be the killer. Like, we know that they're not gonna do that again because they already did that in the first movie, and these movies are so self-aware, right? They're not gonna copy their own ideas, especially not in the very first sequel. So it was slightly predictable in that we knew who the killer probably would not be, but they still tried to make it seem like he might be. And then there was the twist that Mickey was one of the killers, but that wasn't that surprising because he had all but disappeared by the time that the third act started. So that wasn't one of the biggest surprises, but Mrs. Loomis? Debbie Salt? Debbie Salt, Mrs. Loomis? Yeah, that was a shock, especially because we had never been introduced to the character of Billy Loomis's mom before. And we also did not know that he got his crazy from her. Apparently it was genetic. I thought that was really clever, especially because she's a character that we obviously didn't really like very much, so we weren't losing much by her being revealed to be the killer. Same with Mickey, he wasn't super likable. I think I also would have hated it if she wasn't one of the killers, because then that would mean that she could still bother Gale in future movies, and I would not not be on board with that. So all that being said, I did really like the ending of this movie. There were so many different characters involved with the climax of the movie, so it really keeps you on your toes. And then there's the twist with Mrs. Loomis. She betrays Mickey and kills him. Wild times. You had Mickey, Mrs. Loomis, Derek, Cotton, and then Gail and Sydney. So my head was reeling, but it was a really fun time. And it's still really fun on a rewatch because you kind of forget about all these little misdirects that they try to throw on you, and so you can play a fun little game of what if. And again, I think that this movie, along with the first Scream, is so rewatchable because of how likable the characters are and even a lot of the surrounding cast. Like the guest stars that they got in this movie, as I mentioned, Sarah Michelle Gellar, who I love dearly, and I never like seeing her die. I never like seeing Randy die. And so even if it's a second or third rewatch, I'm still like, eee! Same with the moment where Sydney has to climb over Ghostface to get out of the car. That was a crazy tense moment. That gets me every time. And I think that the last topic that I want to talk about today is kind of the motivations of Mickey. Essentially, he wanted to blame scary movies for him wanting to kill people and pursue this plan of his. That's kind of disturbing to me because in real life, there were Scream copycat killers. I'll link below Bailey Sarian's video about that because I actually highly recommend her channel. She does really beautiful makeup looks while talking about true crime. It's very interesting. But she talks about this really sad story where this girl was murdered by two of her friends that wanted to copy the Scream movies. I'm not of the opinion that movies make killers by any means. It's like Billy said very creepily, because now this applies to real life. I think that movies just make killers more creative. And because I wasn't alive or I was too young to really be aware of this going on, did you hear about these murders, like when that happened? Did any of you guys recognize sort of a public change in perception of these movies in particular at all? I'm curious to know about that. Obviously, there was not an extreme connection by any means. These movies kept being made. I just want to know if there was kind of any difference in public perception. Or if that was even a widely known case. It probably wasn't, but I have no idea. I love this sequel, and as Randy says, usually sequels are inherently just a little bit worse, but I think I love this sequel almost as much as the original. I love the setting, I love the twists, I love the leading ladies. Everything about it is a win for me, except for Dewey and his mustache. Next week's Scream video about Scream 3 might be a little bit longer because the meta-ness, the commentary just keeps piling onto itself. There were a lot more topics that they explored. There's actually a lot more social commentary in Scream 3 that I think is really interesting, so next week we'll have a much longer discussion about it. So I do hope that you join me then. If you'd like to follow me on social media or subscribe to my Patreon or follow my vlog channel, that'll all be linked down below. I hope that you enjoyed this video and I hope I catch you in the next one. Bye!